a desperate mother with young children, used to take leftovers from the restaurant where she worked. Everyone laughed at her, but when the new boss installed surveillance cameras, Grace woke up at 6 in the morning, as she did every day, and quickly prepared herself for work. Her children, James and Thomas, were still asleep in their small shared room, unaware of the worries that occupied their mother's mind. Dressed in her work uniform, a white shirt and black pants, she left the house without breakfast, knowing she couldn't afford to be late to the Emperor's Crown restaurant. Upon arriving at the restaurant, the morning bustle had already begun. The chefs were preparing ingredients for the day, and the waitstaff was organizing the tables. Grace headed to the kitchen, where she began her daily cleaning routine. She washed dishes, cleaned surfaces, took out the trash, and swept the backyard. Although her job was exhausting, and her salary barely enough to cover her children's basic needs and the rent, she couldn't allow herself to falter. As she scrubbed the dishes, her thoughts drifted to Leo, her late husband. Leo had worked tirelessly as a taxi driver, trying to provide the best he could for his family despite financial hardships and the lack of support from his own parents, who struggled with alcoholism. His death in a tragic car accident had left a huge void in Grace's and her children's lives. During a brief break, Grace closed her eyes and remembered Leo. She visualized his warm smile and encouraging words. Leo used to tell her that no matter the difficulties, they would always find a way to move forward together. His absence was painful, but his memories gave her the strength she needed to keep fighting for her children's well-being. Grace shook her head, returning to the present. She couldn't afford to lose time in melancholy thoughts. There was work to do. She continued cleaning and organizing the kitchen, while the other restaurant employees tended to their tasks. While some colleagues were kind, others looked down on her, especially knowing her financial situation. The day wore on, and Grace felt the exhaustion accumulating in her body. However, she didn't let it stop her. She knew that every clean dish, every swept corner, and every trash bag taken out were necessary steps to keep her job and, therefore, her children's sustenance. At the end of her shift, Grace gathered her things and headed home. The walk back was her time to reflect, mentally reviewing the day's events and planning how to stretch her salary to cover all the needs. Upon arriving at her apartment, she was greeted by the hugs of James and Thomas, who eagerly awaited her return. Despite her fatigue, seeing their smiles gave her renewed energy to continue. The night passed with Grace helping her children with their homework, despite her own exhaustion. She prepared a modest dinner with the few ingredients she had and made sure her children went to bed early. After tucking them in, she sat at the small kitchen table and reviewed the bills, trying to find a way to make the money last until the end of the month. Finally, she collapsed into bed, exhausted but determined. Her children were her world, and every sacrifice was worth it if it meant they could have a better future. With these thoughts in mind, she closed her eyes, hoping that tomorrow would bring better opportunities. Grace began her daily routine at the Emperor's Crown, as she did every other day. She meticulously cleaned the kitchen, ensuring everything was spotless before the service started. As she scrubbed the dishes and organized the utensils, she couldn't help but think of her children, James and Thomas, who would be at school, probably facing another day of teasing due to their financial situation. While sweeping the preparation area, her eyes landed on several untouched plates of food placed near the trash bin. These were leftovers from customers who hadn't finished their meals. Her stomach growled at the sight of the food, and her mind began to calculate how those meals could feed her children that night. The thought of taking the leftovers home crossed her mind for the first time. At first, she hesitated. She knew that taking food from the restaurant without permission could get her in trouble, but the need was urgent. Her children needed something more than the thick gruel made with water they usually ate. Determined, she looked around to ensure no one was watching, and she began carefully gathering the plates. That night, when she arrived home, James and Thomas ran to greet her, their faces lit up with excitement to see their mother. Grace, with a tired but satisfied smile, showed them the surprise she had brought. Dinner consisted of cheese slices, sausages, and fresh vegetables, a meal the children hadn't enjoyed in a long time. "Where did you get this, Mum?" James asked as he devoured his portion. Grace, feeling a pang of guilt, replied softly, "It's from my work. Some customers don't finish their meals, and I thought we could make use of it." The children, unaware of their mother's internal struggle, ate happily. Seeing them enjoy a decent meal filled Grace with a sense of accomplishment and relief. Though she knew it wasn't the ideal solution, those leftovers represented a small victory in her daily battle to keep her family fed and safe. The next day, as she cleaned the kitchen, Grace stayed alert. She eagerly awaited finding more leftovers to take home. As the days passed, this act became part of her routine. She only took what was clearly rejected by the customers and never touched the food intended for service. The changes in her children's lives were noticeable. James and Thomas began to look healthier and more energetic. Grace, though exhausted, felt more hopeful. The relief of being able to offer them better nutrition outweighed the guilt she felt for her actions. One night, while gathering leftover food, a troubling thought crossed her mind. What if someone notices? However, her children's needs outweighed her fears. She convinced herself that as long as she was discreet, no one would notice the missing leftovers. Grace adopted a stray dog named Bruno, who began following her on her way home. The children quickly grew attached to him, and although it meant one more mouth to feed, Bruno became part of the family, bringing joy and companionship. As the days went by, the routine of taking leftovers home continued without a hitch. Grace, though always vigilant, felt grateful for every small bite she could offer her children. Life was still hard, but those small victories fed her hope and determination to keep moving forward. The rumor of a new owner coming to the Emperor's crown spread quickly among the employees. Grace heard the whispers as she scrubbed the dishes. Some said the new owner was a young and ambitious man, eager to make drastic changes to improve the business. Others, more skeptical, feared that these changes would mean layoffs and increased work pressure. One morning, as she cleaned the backyard, Grace saw a luxurious car pull into the restaurant's parking lot. A young man, dressed in an impeccable suit and with a determined look, stepped out. It was Nick Ferrer, the new owner. The employees gathered in the main dining room where Nick addressed them. "Good morning, everyone," Nick began in a firm and authoritative voice. "My name is Nick Ferrer, and I am the new owner of the Emperor's Crown. I want this restaurant to be the best in the city, and to achieve that, we need to make some changes. We will be implementing new security and efficiency measures. I want everyone to feel part of this team and to give their best." Grace felt a knot in her stomach. Nick's words were motivating, but they also implied more scrutiny and perhaps less room for the small acts that helped her feed her children. As he spoke, Grace noticed some of her co-workers exchanging nervous glances. The uncertainty was palpable in the air. After the meeting, Nick walked through the restaurant, inspecting every corner and taking notes. His presence was imposing, and although he didn't say anything specific, his gaze scrutinized everything with meticulous attention. Grace continued with her tasks, trying not to draw attention, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A few days later, Nick installed security cameras at various strategic points around the restaurant. "It's to ensure everyone's safety and improve efficiency," he explained to the staff. The cameras were placed in the kitchen, the preparation area, the main dining room, and the backyard. Grace felt added pressure every time she saw one of those cameras. She knew her movements were being monitored. That same night, while collecting leftovers as usual, Grace felt more nervous than ever. She looked around, searching for the cameras, trying to be as discreet as possible. Despite her fear, she couldn't stop thinking about James and Thomas, and how those leftovers had improved their diet. Her need outweighed her fear, and she decided to carry on with more caution than before. The days grew more tense for Grace. Every time she collected leftover food, she felt the cameras watching her, judging her. However, the restaurant's routine continued, and the employees gradually got used to Nick's presence and the new security measures. One day, while cleaning the kitchen, one of the chefs approached Grace. "Have you heard about the new boss?" he asked in a whisper. "They say he's ruthless with those who don't follow the rules." Grace nodded, feeling fear tightening in her stomach. She couldn't stop thinking about her children and how the leftovers had allowed them to eat better. She knew she had to be extremely careful. That afternoon, Nick announced there would be a surprise inspection to evaluate everyone's performance. The employees worked even harder, aware that every move was being watched and judged. Grace, with her heart racing, continued with her tasks, hoping her efforts would go unnoticed. Nick's arrival had brought a new level of pressure, but also a spark of hope. Maybe, she thought, if she proved to be an exemplary employee, she could earn his favor and eventually improve her situation and that of her children. Days passed and Grace continued with her routine, taking leftovers home to feed her children. Although the security cameras made her uneasy, the needs of James and Thomas drove her to keep going. She was extra careful, making sure not to be detected. One night, after the customers had left and the restaurant was closed, Nick decided to review the security camera footage. He wanted to ensure the new measures were working correctly. As he reviewed the images from the kitchen, something caught his attention. He saw Grace gathering leftover food and discreetly placing it in her bag. He immediately felt a mix of surprise and indignation. The next day, Nick decided to confront Grace. He waited until her shift was over and called her to his office. Grace felt a knot in her stomach when she received the call. She headed to the office with a racing heart, fearing the worst. "Grace, please, have a seat," Nick said, gesturing to a chair in front of his desk. Grace obeyed, trying to stay calm. "I've been reviewing the security footage," Nick continued, "and I noticed you've been taking food from the restaurant. Do you have anything to say about that?" Grace felt her world collapsing. She swallowed hard and with a trembling voice began to explain, "Mr. Ferrer, I'm so sorry. I know it's wrong, but I don't do it for myself. It's for my children. We're going through very hard times and sometimes I don't have enough to feed them. I only take the leftovers that customers leave untouched. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Nick observed her in silence, noting the sincerity and desperation in her eyes. His initial sternness softened a bit. "Grace, I understand you're going through tough times, but that doesn't justify stealing. However, I want to understand your situation better. Could you take me to your home so I can see how you and your children live?" Grace nodded, surprised by the request, but at the same time she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, after seeing her reality, Nick would understand her better. That afternoon, Nick accompanied Grace to her home. As he entered the small, humble apartment, he saw the reality of Grace's life, the worn-out walls, the old and battered furniture, and the few items in the pantry. James and Thomas ran to greet their mother, showing a joy that contrasted with the precariousness of their surroundings. Nick looked at the children and then at Grace. He realized that her actions weren't out of greed but out of sheer necessity. He felt ashamed for having judged her so quickly. "Grace," he finally said, "I now understand your situation better. I'm sorry for putting you in such a difficult position. From today onwards, you'll receive an extra bonus so you can buy enough food for your children. Also, I'll make sure they receive proper meals from the restaurant." Grace couldn't believe what she was hearing. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she thanked Nick with all her heart. "Thank you, Mr. Ferrer. I don't know how to thank you enough." "Just keep doing your job with dedication, Grace. We all need a little help sometimes," Nick responded with a smile. That night, Grace went home with a sense of relief and hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Thanks to Nick's understanding and generosity, she could offer her children a better life. As she lay down, she thought about how much things had changed in just one day and felt grateful for the kindness that still existed in the world. The air was filled with renewed hope as Grace headed to work the next day. The conversation with Nick had changed her outlook. She no longer felt the crushing weight of desperation. Instead, a sense of relief and gratitude accompanied her. When she arrived at the restaurant, she couldn't help but smile slightly, knowing that something good had come out of her struggles. Nick also felt different. The visit to Grace's home had been an eye-opener. He had grown up in a privileged environment, and although he had always worked hard, he had never seen true need up close. Seeing the conditions in which Grace lived had given him a new perspective and empathy he hadn't had before. That morning, Nick called a staff meeting. "I want to thank you all for your dedication and hard work. I'm implementing some new policies to ensure that everyone at the Emperor's Crown is treated with fairness and respect. Starting today, all employees will have access to an additional bonus and a meal program so that no one has to worry about their basic well-being." The announcement was met with surprise and gratitude. Grace felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders. After the meeting, Nick approached her and handed her an envelope. "This is your first bonus, Grace. Use this money for whatever you need." Grace took the envelope with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Ferrer. This means a lot to me and my children." "You don't need to thank me, Grace. Just keep doing your job with the same dedication you've shown so far," Nick replied with a smile. That afternoon, Grace went to a nearby supermarket and bought fresh, nutritious food for her children. The joy of being able to fill the pantry with products she couldn't afford before brought tears of happiness to her eyes. That night, she prepared a special dinner for James and Thomas. The children, upon seeing the meal, couldn't contain their excitement. "Mama, where did you get all of this?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide open. "It's thanks to Mr. Ferrer," Grace replied, serving the food. "He's helping us get what we need." As they ate, Grace watched her children. Their faces reflected a happiness and tranquility she hadn't seen in a long time. The food, Nick's support, and the promise of a more stable future filled her heart with gratitude. In the following days, Grace's life began to improve significantly. The additional bonus and the meals provided by the restaurant alleviated many of her worries. She also began to notice greater solidarity and camaraderie among her co-workers. Nick's new policies not only helped Grace, but also created a more positive and collaborative atmosphere in the restaurant. Nick, for his part, continued observing and learning. The experience with Grace had taught him the importance of taking care of his team. He decided to spend more time with the employees, listening to their stories and understanding their challenges. This new approach allowed him to build stronger and more meaningful relationships with his staff. One afternoon, Nick invited Grace to his office for a more informal conversation. "Grace, I've been thinking about how we can do more to help you and other employees in similar situations. Do you have any suggestions on what we could improve?" Grace, surprised by the question, thought for a moment before responding. "Well, Mr. Ferrer, I think a training program could be helpful. Many of us want to improve our skills and advance, but we don't always have the resources or the time to do so." Nick nodded, considering the idea. "That's an excellent suggestion, Grace. We'll implement a training program for all interested employees. I want everyone here to have the opportunity to grow and improve." Grace left Nick's office feeling valued and respected. She was not only receiving help for her immediate situation, but also being given the opportunity to improve her future. That night, as she watched her children sleep, she promised herself to seize every opportunity to secure a better tomorrow for them. Over time, the new policies implemented by Nick began to show positive results. The atmosphere at the Emperor's Crown was more harmonious, and the employees worked with a renewed sense of purpose. Grace, in particular, felt that her life was significantly improving. However, not everything was as calm as it seemed on the surface. One afternoon, Nick was reviewing the inventory records when he noticed some discrepancies. There were inconsistencies in the quantities of ingredients and products that couldn't be explained by simple human error. He decided to investigate further, convinced that someone was stealing. Nick installed more security cameras in the storage areas and began reviewing the footage more closely. After several days of observation, he finally discovered the culprit, John, the head chef. Nick couldn't believe it. John had always been considered an excellent cook and a pillar of the team. Determined to handle the situation carefully, Nick called John to his office. "John, I've noticed some discrepancies in the inventory, and after reviewing the security cameras, I saw that you've been taking ingredients and products without authorization. Can you explain what's going on?" John, with his head down and his voice trembling, began to speak. "Mr. Ferrer, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to do this, but I'm in a desperate situation. I have debts with some drug traffickers, and if I don't pay, my family is in danger. I didn't know where else to turn." Nick took a moment to process John's confession. Although he was upset about the theft, he also understood the desperation that could drive someone to make poor decisions. "John, what you've done is wrong and has consequences. However, I understand that you're in a difficult situation. I want to help you, but first, we need to fix this." John looked up, surprised. "Help me, Mr. Ferrer, I wasn't expecting that." Nick nodded. "Yes, John. We all make mistakes, but I also believe in second chances. I'll pay your debts and help you get out of this situation, but in return, I need your commitment to be honest and loyal from now on." John, with tears in his eyes, accepted Nick's offer. "Thank you, Mr. Ferrer. I won't let you down. I'll do everything I can to redeem myself." That afternoon, Nick accompanied John to pay off his debts with the traffickers. The tension was palpable, but they ultimately managed to resolve the situation without incident. John was deeply grateful and promised Nick that he would work hard to regain his trust. The next day, Nick gathered the restaurant staff and, without giving specific details, spoke about the importance of honesty and loyalty. "I want everyone to know that I value your work and dedication. If you ever find yourselves in a difficult situation, please come to me. Together, we can find a solution." Grace, watching the interaction, felt even more grateful to work in a place where the owner truly cared about his employees. John's story reminded her of her own moments of desperation and how Nick's help had changed her life. In the following weeks, John worked with renewed dedication. Not only did he improve his performance in the kitchen, but he also began organizing workshops to teach other employees cooking techniques and food management. His commitment and change in attitude were evident to everyone. Meanwhile, Grace seized the opportunity to improve her own skills. She participated in the workshops and volunteered to help with the restaurant's new initiatives. Her life, though still full of challenges, was on an upward path thanks to Nick's support and the community that had formed at the Emperor's Crown. Weeks passed, and the atmosphere at the Emperor's Crown continued to improve. John, having been given a second chance, dedicated himself enthusiastically to his work. His commitment and skills in the kitchen were evident, and his positive attitude began to inspire other employees. One morning, Nick decided it was time to talk to John about an idea he had been considering. "John, your transformation has been impressive," Nick began as they sat down in the office. "I want to propose something that I believe could benefit not only the restaurant but also the community." John, curious, nodded. "What is it, Mr. Ferrer?" "I've been thinking about how we can do more for our community and help those who need a second chance like you," Nick explained. "I want you to start a cooking training program for at-risk youth and people who need a new direction in their lives. You're an excellent chef, and I believe you could teach them a lot." John felt honored and excited by the proposal. "I'd love to do that, Mr. Ferrer. Cooking saved me, and I'd love to help others in the same way." And so the cooking training program at the Emperor's Crown was born. John organized the first classes, and soon the restaurant was filled with young people eager to learn. Some were teenagers who needed a path away from the streets, while others were adults looking for new job opportunities. Grace watched with admiration as the program grew. She decided to get involved as well, helping with logistics and ensuring the participants had everything they needed for the classes. Seeing the young people learn and grow reminded her of her own journey and how a second chance could change lives. Nick, for his part, continued to connect with his employees. He spent time in the kitchen, learning about the lives of those who worked for him and finding ways to make the work environment more positive and supportive. His relationship with Grace also deepened. He often sought her out for conversations, valuing her perspective and the clarity with which she saw things. One afternoon, after one of their cooking classes, Nick invited Grace to have coffee at a nearby cafe. As they sat down, Nick remarked, "Grace, I've noticed how much you've immersed yourself in the training program. You've become an essential part of this community." Grace smiled shyly. "Thank you, Mr. Ferrer. This place and the people here have given me so much. I want to give back a little of what I've received." Nick nodded. "That's admirable, Grace. I've been thinking about how we can continue improving the restaurant and helping more people. I want you to be part of that process. Your dedication and empathy are inspiring." Grace was touched by Nick's words. "I'd love to help in any way I can, Mr. Ferrer. This place has changed my life and my children's lives. I'm grateful for everything." As the afternoon turned into evening, the conversation between Nick and Grace flowed easily. They talked about their dreams, aspirations, and how they wanted to continue supporting the community. A deeper connection began to form between them, based on mutual respect and admiration. The cooking training program didn't just have a positive impact on the participants, it also brought a new energy to the restaurant. Customers started noticing the difference not just in the quality of the food, but also in the warm and welcoming atmosphere that had been created. John, revitalized by his new responsibilities, became a mentor to many of the young people. Watching them progress and find their passion for cooking gave him a renewed sense of purpose. His story of redemption inspired everyone around him. Weeks turned into months, and the restaurant, the Emperor's Crown, thrived, both financially and in spirit and community. The employees worked together with a cohesion and dedication that had never been seen before, and the cooking training program led by John continued to grow and have a positive impact. Nick and Grace started spending more time together, not just at work, but also outside of it. Nick took an interest in getting to know James and Thomas, often inviting them to participate in activities and events organized by the restaurant. These gestures did not go unnoticed by Grace, who deeply appreciated the attention and care Nick showed towards her children. One afternoon, Nick organized a picnic for all the employees and their families. The event was held in a nearby park, with games, activities, and a large meal prepared by the students of the cooking training program. James and Thomas were excited, running and playing with other children, while Grace watched them with a smile. During the event, Nick approached Grace with a smile. "Would you like to take a walk?" he asked. Grace nodded, grateful for a moment of peace. As they walked through the park, Nick shared more about his life and how he had come to own the restaurant. "I always wanted to do something meaningful," Nick said. "Something that wasn't just profitable but also had a positive impact on the community. Knowing your story and seeing how a little help can make a big difference has inspired me a lot." Grace listened intently, feeling a growing connection. "You've done much more than just help, Nick. You've changed lives, including mine. I don't know how to thank you enough." Nick smiled. "Seeing you and your children happy is thanks enough. I've learned so much from you, Grace. Your strength and dedication are admirable." Their walk ended, but the conversation continued for the rest of the day. As the sun set, Grace and Nick realized that their feelings for each other went beyond friendship and gratitude. There was a genuine, deep connection between them, one that promised to grow over time. In the days that followed, Nick began to involve himself even more in Grace's and her children's lives. He often invited them to his home for dinners and activities. James and Thomas quickly grew fond of Nick, seeing him not just as a benefactor, but also as a father figure. Nick's presence brought stability and joy that they had not felt in a long time. One night, while having dinner at Nick's house, James innocently asked, "Mom, can Mr. Nick be our new dad?" Grace and Nick looked at each other in surprise, but Nick gently replied, "James, I can't replace your dad, but I'll always be here for you and your brother, to help and support you in any way you need." Grace felt a wave of emotions at Nick's sincere response. After the children went to bed, Nick and Grace talked about what James's question meant and their own feelings. "Grace, I want to be honest with you," Nick said, taking her hand. "You and your children mean a lot to me. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to be here for you, to help you, and to be a part of your lives." With tears in her eyes, Grace replied, "Nick, your presence has already made a huge difference in our lives. You mean a lot to me too. I want us to keep building this together, step by step." From that night on, the relationship between Nick and Grace grew even closer. Together, they continued working to improve the restaurant and support the community. John, seeing the blossoming of this relationship, felt even more motivated in his own journey of redemption and commitment to the training program. Time flew by and soon December arrived, bringing with it the festive spirit of Christmas. Grace, James, Thomas, and Nick began making plans to celebrate together. This would be the first year in a long time that Grace could dream of a special Christmas for her children, and the excitement in the air was palpable. One afternoon, Nick arrived at Grace's apartment with a large, colorful box. "Let's decorate together," he announced with a smile. James and Thomas jumped with joy. "Yes, let's put up the Christmas tree," they shouted as they bounced around him. In the living room, Nick and Grace unpacked the decorations. There were colorful balls, twinkling lights, and shiny ornaments. Together, they started to set up the tree. James and Thomas helped hang the ornaments on the branches, their laughter filling the apartment with joy. While decorating, Nick put on some Christmas music, filling the room with festive melodies. Grace, watching her children enjoy themselves, felt a warmth in her heart that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Nick, for his part, delighted in seeing the happiness on Grace's and her children's faces. Once the tree was fully decorated, they all sat down to admire their work. "This is the most beautiful tree we've ever had," said Thomas, his eyes shining. "And we did it together," Nick added, smiling at Grace. The following days were filled with Christmas preparations. Nick invited Grace and the children to his house to bake cookies and do crafts. With each activity, their bond grew stronger. James and Thomas began to see Nick not just as the restaurant owner who helped their mother, but as an integral part of their family. On Christmas Eve, Nick organized a special dinner at the restaurant for all the employees and their families. The main hall was decorated with lights and garlands, and a large table was set with a delicious festive meal. John and the participants in the training program had worked hard to prepare the food, and the result was impressive. Grace and her children arrived at the restaurant dressed in their best clothes, courtesy of a generous Christmas bonus Nick had given to all the employees. James and Thomas felt like they were in a fairy tale, dazzled by the lights and festive atmosphere. During the dinner, Nick stood up to make a toast. "I want to thank everyone for their hard work and dedication this year. Together, we have not only created a successful restaurant, but a true community. I especially want to thank Grace and her children for being a constant source of inspiration and strength. Merry Christmas to everyone." Everyone raised their glasses and toasted, feeling the warmth of camaraderie and the Christmas spirit. The dinner was a success, full of laughter, shared stories, and touching moments. After the meal, gifts were handed out to all the children present. James and Thomas received new bicycles, a gift they had never expected. Their eyes sparkled with excitement as they thanked Nick. "Thank you, Mr. Nick," they exclaimed in unison. "This is the best Christmas present ever." Grace, watching the scene, couldn't hold back tears of happiness. Nick approached her and took her hand. "This is just the beginning, Grace. I want you and your children to have everything you deserve." That night, they returned to the apartment, exhausted but happy. Before going to bed, they sat together in the living room, admiring the Christmas tree and the twinkling lights. Grace realized how much her life had changed since Nick had come into it. Her children were happy, they had a bright future ahead of them, and she had found new hope. The new year began with renewed energy at the Emperor's Crown. The success of the Christmas dinner had brought the employees and their families even closer together, and everyone was excited about what the future held. Nick, seeing the potential in Grace, decided it was time to help her grow even more, not just as a mother and employee, but also as a professional capable of handling the restaurant's financial and operational aspects. One afternoon, Nick called Grace into his office. "Grace, I've been thinking a lot about how I can help you reach your full potential," he began with a smile. "I want to teach you about the financial and operational management of the restaurant. I believe you have the talent and determination to learn and take on new responsibilities." Grace, surprised and excited, nodded. "Thank you, Nick. I'm willing to learn everything I can. I want to do everything possible to help the restaurant and improve our lives." Thus began a new chapter in Grace's life. Nick dedicated time after work to teach her basic financial concepts such as budgeting, tracking expenses, and the importance of saving. He also showed her how the restaurant's operations were managed, from menu planning to inventory management and coordination with suppliers. One afternoon, while they were reviewing the accounting books, Nick explained, "Grace, understanding these numbers is crucial for making informed decisions. Knowing how and where the money is spent allows us to find areas where we can save or invest better." Grace paid close attention, taking notes and asking questions. Although it seemed overwhelming at first, her determination and Nick's patience made the learning process rewarding. Over time, she began to feel more confident in her new skills. Meanwhile, John continued organizing cooking classes for the neighborhood's youth. Grace, wanting to get more involved, offered to help coordinate these classes. James and Thomas also attended, enjoying learning to cook and showing a natural talent in the kitchen. One day, during one of the cooking classes, John called Grace over to help the young students with a complex recipe. "Grace, could you show them how to make a good bechamel sauce? I think they would benefit from seeing it in action." Grace, nervous at first, accepted the challenge. With John's instructions and her own practice at home, she prepared the sauce with skill and explained each step to the attentive students. James and Thomas, proud of their mother, watched her with admiration. The cooking workshops not only improved the participants' culinary skills, but also fostered a sense of community and belonging. The young people, many of whom had faced significant challenges in their lives, found in the program a place where they could learn and grow. Meanwhile, Nick continued his financial education with Grace. He taught her about the importance of long-term savings, how to invest wisely, and how to plan for the future. "I want you to be prepared for anything, Grace," he told her one afternoon. "Financial stability will give you peace of mind and allow you to make decisions from a position of strength." Grace absorbed all the information like a sponge. Thanks to the bonuses and her new knowledge, she began saving part of her salary and planning for a better future for her children. She also realized that with the skills she was acquiring, she could take on more responsibilities at the restaurant and contribute more significantly. One day, Nick offered Grace a new role at the restaurant, management assistant. "Grace, you have shown incredible growth and commitment. I want you to take a more active role in the restaurant's management. You'll be my management assistant, helping me with planning and executing daily operations." Grace, excited and honored, accepted the offer. She knew this new role would not only improve her financial situation, but also allow her to learn and grow even more. Nick's confidence in her abilities motivated her to keep moving forward and give her best. Grace's life had changed in ways she never imagined. Thanks to Nick's help and guidance, she had not only improved her financial situation, but also found a new purpose and direction in her life. The relationship between Nick and Grace had strengthened, and James and Thomas saw him as a father figure. Everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly, and the future looked promising. On a sunny Saturday, Nick organized a charity event at the restaurant to raise funds to support more families in difficult situations. The energy at the Emperor's Crown was contagious. Employees, customers, and community members worked together with a common goal. Grace, in her new role as management assistant, coordinated every detail with efficiency and enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Nick welcomed the guests and thanked them for their support. His charisma and dedication were evident, and everyone appreciated his commitment to the community. During the event, Nick surprised Grace with an emotional speech. "Today, I want to recognize someone very special," Nick said, smiling at Grace. "Grace has shown incredible strength and dedication. She has overcome many adversities and has become a leader here at the Emperor's Crown. Thanks to her and to all of you, we have created something wonderful. Together, we can achieve even more." With tears in her eyes, Grace received a warm round of applause from everyone present. She felt immense gratitude for everything Nick had done for her and her children. As the afternoon came to a close, the charity event at the Emperor's Crown had been a resounding success. With a satisfied smile, Nick decided it was a good time to pick up some important documents he had forgotten at home. He promised to return quickly and bid farewell to Grace with a hug. "I won't be long. I'll be back soon," he said, giving James and Thomas a final kiss on the forehead. Driving through the quiet streets, Nick thought about how fortunate he was to have met Grace and her children. He remembered the happy moments they had shared and how his life had gained new purpose by helping those in need. "I'm lucky to have them in my life," he thought as a warm feeling filled his heart. Suddenly, a car speeding towards him appeared in his line of sight, zigzagging across the road. The driver seemed to have lost control. Nick, his reflexes quickened, tried to maneuver to avoid the impact. "No, no, no," he thought, feeling a knot of fear forming in his stomach. Time seemed to slow down as the car approached inexorably. Nick gripped the steering wheel tightly, his thoughts becoming frantic. "Grace, the kids, it can't end like this." His mind filled with images of Grace, James, and Thomas, and the thought of never seeing them again tore at his soul. The crash was inevitable. The sound of metal twisting and glass shattering filled the air. The impact was brutal. Nick felt sharp pain coursing through his body as the car rolled. Darkness began to overtake his vision, but in those final moments he could only think of Grace and the children. Back at the restaurant, the atmosphere was festive and joyful. Grace was busy helping to clean up and organize after the event. James and Thomas played with other children, laughing and enjoying the moment. Everything seemed perfect until Grace's phone rang. "Are you a relative of Nick Ferrer?" asked a voice on the other end of the line. "He has been in an accident and is in critical condition. We need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible." Grace's world stopped. She felt as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Nick, the man who had transformed her life and her children's, was fighting for his life. Unable to hold back tears, Grace dropped everything and headed to the hospital, with James and Thomas by her side. As she drove to the hospital, Grace's thoughts raced. "This can't be true. Nick has to be okay. The children need him. I need him. He can't leave us now." Fear and desperation engulfed her, but she tried to stay strong for her children, who were scared and confused. Upon arriving at the hospital, Grace was met by a doctor with a grave expression. "Ma'am, Nick has suffered multiple severe injuries. We are doing everything we can, but his condition is very critical." Devastated, Grace clung to her children as they waited for news. The hours passed slowly, each minute an eternity. She remembered all the moments shared with Nick, his kindness, his unwavering support, and how he had brought light into her life during the darkest times. Finally, the doctor returned with a somber expression. "I'm very sorry," he said softly. "We did everything we could, but the injuries were too severe. Nick did not survive the accident." Grace felt the world collapse around her. Tears flowed freely as she embraced James and Thomas. The children, confused and frightened, also cried, realizing that someone very special to them was gone. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Grace. The restaurant and the community were in mourning. Everyone remembered Nick as a generous and compassionate man, someone who always put others before himself. In the midst of her grief, Grace realized the magnitude of Nick's impact on her life. He had left a legacy of kindness and love, and though his absence was heartbreaking, Grace decided to honor his memory by continuing with his vision. With the help of the restaurant staff and the community, she vowed to keep the spirit of the Emperor's crown alive and continue helping those in need. At an emotional farewell ceremony, Grace addressed those present. "Nick taught us all the true meaning of compassion and service. Although his time with us was short, his impact will last forever. We will carry on, honoring his memory in every act of kindness and every smile we can bring to those who need it most." The days following the tragedy were a whirlwind of emotions for Grace. The news of Nick's death hit the community hard, but it was Grace who felt the deepest impact. Nick had been her support, her guide, and her hope in the darkest times, and now he was gone, leaving a vast emptiness in her heart. Grace found herself in a state of shock. Every corner of the restaurant, every part of her life reminded her of Nick. Seeing the bicycles he had given James and Thomas, the Christmas decorations they had put up together, and even the management documents she had learned to handle with his help, all made her relive her loss repeatedly. One night after putting her children to bed, Grace sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the silence of the house. Tears began to flow uncontrollably as she remembered the last time she had seen Nick. His smile, his voice telling her he would be back soon. The pain was unbearable. She wondered how she could go on without him. Nick's death brought back painful memories of Leo's death, her first husband. She remembered how Leo had worked tirelessly to provide for the family, despite the financial difficulties. The night of Leo's accident, when he had fallen asleep at the wheel, had been devastating. Grace had felt her world crumble, but somehow she had found the strength to move forward for her children. However, losing Nick felt different. With Leo, it had been a sudden tragedy, an unexpected loss that had plunged her into darkness. But with Nick, there had been hope, a new beginning. She had believed that they were finally building a life together, a better life for her and her children. Losing him felt like losing that hope, that promising future. Days turned into weeks and Grace sank deeper into her grief. She often found herself in a pit of sadness and despair, struggling to find the strength to go on. James and Thomas were also deeply affected. Though they were young, they understood the magnitude of the loss and saw the pain in their mother's eyes. Grace tried to stay strong for her children, but there were moments when the sadness overwhelmed her. She constantly compared her current situation to the loss of Leo. Both losses were devastating, but this time the weight of the pain felt doubled. Nick had not only been her partner, but also a father figure to James and Thomas, someone who had brought light and hope into their lives. One afternoon, while sitting in the park watching James and Thomas play, she found herself reflecting on Nick's words. She remembered how he had always told her that she was strong, that she could overcome anything. But in those moments, she didn't feel strong. She felt broken, lost in a sea of pain and sadness. The emotional void she found herself in was deep. Every day was a struggle to get out of bed, to face the world. The restaurant, which had once been a place of joy and community, now constantly reminded her of Nick's absence. The employees tried to support her, but they were all dealing with their own grief. One night, after putting her children to bed, Grace sat at the kitchen table, staring at the management papers Nick had taught her to handle. Tears streamed down her face as she thought about how he had believed in her, how he had seen her potential and supported her unconditionally. "How can I go on without you, Nick?" she whispered into the air, her voice broken by pain. "You taught me to be strong, but now I feel so weak." In the midst of her sorrow, Grace remembered Nick's final words about the importance of compassion and serving others. "We will carry on, honoring his memory with every act of kindness," he had said during his farewell speech. Although the pain was overwhelming, Grace knew she had to find a way to move forward, not just for herself, but also for James and Thomas. Life had taught her resilience, and even though it seemed impossible now, she knew she had to find the strength within herself to honor Nick's legacy and continue his mission. As winter turned to spring, and though the pain of losing Nick remained, Grace began to find glimpses of strength amidst her sadness. On the darkest days, she clung to the memories of Nick's encouraging words, his voice echoing in her mind like a beacon of hope. "Never underestimate your ability to overcome challenges," Grace recalled Nick telling her during one of their many lessons. "You have an inner strength you don't even know about. Tap into that strength and trust yourself." One morning, as she sipped a cup of coffee in the kitchen, surrounded by restaurant management documents, she felt a surge of determination. "I can't let everything Nick worked for fall apart," she thought. "He believed in me. It's time I believe in myself too." Determined to honor Nick's memory, Grace rose with a newfound resolve. She knew she had the skills and knowledge to lead the Emperor's crown. Nick had taught her not only about finances and management, but also about leadership and compassion. She was the right person to carry on his legacy. Gathering the restaurant staff, Grace stood before them, a mixture of nerves and determination in her voice. "I know these past months have been hard on all of us," she began, her voice firm yet emotional. "We've lost someone very dear, but we can't let that stop us. Nick taught us the importance of unity, compassion, and dedication. With his legacy in mind, I commit to leading this restaurant and continuing his vision." The employees looked at her with respect and support. John, the chef, who had been given a second chance thanks to Nick, was the first to speak. "We're with you, Grace. We know how much Nick meant to you and to all of us. We'll move forward, together." With the support of her team, Grace began to implement the knowledge and skills she had acquired. She resumed financial planning, ensuring every expense was justified and every investment well considered. She met with suppliers, renegotiated contracts, and sought new opportunities to improve the restaurant. Grace also focused on maintaining the positive and welcoming atmosphere that Nick had created. She continued to support the culinary training program led by John, expanding it to include more young people from the neighborhood. James and Thomas, inspired by their mother's example, began helping more at the restaurant, showing a growing interest in both cooking and management. With a new perspective and renewed energy, Grace threw herself into her work with more dedication than ever. She organized community events at the restaurant, raising funds for charitable causes and strengthening ties with the community. She implemented new ideas to improve the menu and customer experience, ensuring that the Emperor's Crown remained a special place for everyone. The employees, inspired by her leadership, worked with enthusiasm and commitment. The atmosphere in the restaurant was filled with positive and hopeful energy. Customers noticed the difference and began frequenting the place even more, drawn not only by the delicious food, but also by the spirit of community and solidarity that Grace had cultivated. The months following the tragedy brought a period of transformation and growth for the Emperor's Crown. Under Grace's determined and compassionate leadership, the restaurant not only survived Nick's loss but also thrived in ways no one had anticipated. Grace fully embraced her role as a leader, utilizing the knowledge and skills that Nick had passed on to her. She implemented a series of changes and improvements that quickly began to yield positive results. Her first measure was to strengthen the employee bonus program, a system Nick had initiated and one that Grace knew she had to continue and expand. "The success of this restaurant depends on each one of you," Grace said during a staff meeting. "Nick believed in recognizing and rewarding effort and dedication, and so do I. Starting today, we will increase bonuses for those who show exceptional commitment and contribute to our team's growth." The employees received the news with enthusiasm. Feeling valued and appreciated not only boosted morale, but also incentivized greater performance and dedication. John, the chef, and the young trainees began showing renewed enthusiasm in their daily tasks. The kitchen buzzed with energy and creativity. Grace also promoted the organization of charity events, following Nick's philosophy of giving back to the community. The first major event was a charity dinner to raise funds for a local homeless shelter. The restaurant was filled with customers and community members, all eager to support the cause and enjoy a night of excellent food and company. John and his team prepared a special menu for the occasion, showcasing their culinary talents and the progress they had made thanks to the training program. Grace ensured that every detail of the event was perfect, from the decor to the music. The night was a resounding success, raising a significant amount of money for the shelter. During the dinner, Grace addressed the guests with an emotional speech. "Nick taught us the true value of compassion and generosity," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Today, we honor his memory by helping those in need. Thank you all for your support and for believing in this vision. Together, we can make a difference." Charity events became a regular part of the restaurant's calendar. Grace organized charity dinners, community workshops, and volunteer days, involving both employees and customers. Each event strengthened the bonds within the community and underscored the restaurant's commitment to the well-being of others. In addition to her focus on the community, Grace worked tirelessly to improve the restaurant's internal operations. She introduced new technologies for managing reservations and orders, optimized kitchen processes, and established stronger relationships with suppliers. These improvements increased efficiency and allowed the restaurant to offer even better service to its customers. The restaurant's success was also reflected in its finances. Revenue increased significantly, allowing Grace to reinvest in the business and in her employees. With the additional funds, she was able to offer continuous training to her team, ensuring that everyone had the opportunity to grow and develop professionally. One day, while reviewing the financial reports in her office, Grace realized just how much they had accomplished. "We did it," she thought with pride. "We've turned this restaurant into a beacon of hope and community, just as Nick always dreamed." The employees felt the change too. Violet, a waitress who had worked at the Emperor's Crown for years, commented, "I've never felt so proud to work here. Grace has transformed this place. It's not just a job, it's a family." Grace, moved by Violet's words, knew they had come far, but she also knew there was more to do. She continued to look for new ways to innovate and improve, always with the mission of honoring Nick's legacy and serving the community. As the months passed and under Grace's inspiring leadership, the Emperor's Crown flourished in ways even she hadn't anticipated. Not only had it solidified its position as the community's most beloved restaurant, but it also began to expand its influence beyond its walls. With her dedication and clear vision, Grace became the restaurant's central figure. Her ability to connect with people and her genuine interest in improving their lives made her stand out not only as a leader, but also as a mentor and friend. The employees looked up to her as a role model, and the community deeply respected her. With the restaurant's success, Grace decided it was time to expand. The Emperor's Crown opened several branches across the city, each reflecting the values and philosophy that Nick had instilled. Each new branch was met with enthusiasm, and soon, the restaurant's name became synonymous with quality, compassion, and community. During the opening of the first branch, Grace took a moment to reflect. She looked at the gathered crowd and felt a mix of pride and nostalgia. "Nick, all of this is thanks to you," she thought. "I hope you're proud of what we've achieved." In her inaugural speech, Grace shared some heartfelt words. "This is a very special moment for all of us. Each new branch is a testament to the positive impact we can have in our communities. Nick showed us the way, and we will continue forward, honoring his memory in everything we do." The expansion brought new opportunities and challenges. Grace implemented training programs at each branch, ensuring that all employees had the skills and knowledge necessary to provide the best possible service. She also continued with charitable initiatives, organizing charity events and volunteer days at each new location. One afternoon, while reviewing plans for the third branch, Grace found an old photo of her and Nick on her desk. The image captured a moment of happiness during one of the community events. Grace allowed herself a few moments to remember Nick and everything he had meant to her. "Nick," she whispered, "I miss you every day, but I feel your presence in every corner of this restaurant. Everything we've achieved is because of you. Thank you for believing in me." The main restaurant had become a place of pilgrimage for many. Customers came not just for the food, but to be a part of the story and legacy that Grace and Nick had built. Grace also established a special corner in the restaurant, dedicated to Nick, with photos, letters, and mementos celebrating his life and impact. One of the most emotional moments came during the anniversary of Nick's death. Grace organized a special dinner in his honor, inviting all the employees, their families, and community members. During the dinner, they shared stories and anecdotes about Nick, recalling his kindness, vision, and the way he had touched so many lives. "I remember how Nick always found time to listen to each of us," said John, his voice breaking with emotion. "He gave me a second chance when I needed it the most, and he never stopped believing in me. We owe him so much." With tears in her eyes, Grace spoke. "Nick taught us that true success is not only measured in financial terms, but in the positive impact we can have on others' lives. Today, we honor his memory by continuing his legacy. Let's move forward with the same compassion and dedication that he showed us." The dinner concluded with a toast in Nick's honor, a moment filled with emotion and gratitude. The community, united in his memory, pledged to keep alive the values he had championed. As the months passed, Grace continued to lead with determination and heart. Every decision, every new initiative was infused with Nick's spirit. The expansion of the Emperor's Crown didn't just mean more branches, but also a broader impact on the community. Grace's journey had been long and full of challenges, but through each obstacle she found the strength to keep going, driven by her love for her children and Nick's legacy. Now, years after the tragedy, her life and that of her family had changed in ways she never could have imagined. On a personal level, Grace's life also improved significantly. Thanks to her dedication and the restaurant's success, she was able to secure a stable and prosperous future for James and Thomas. The children, who had once suffered bullying due to their financial situation, were now thriving in school and the community. Both had become actively involved in the restaurant, learning about the business and the importance of helping others. James showed a natural talent for cooking, inspired by John and the training programs. He became a standout apprentice at the main restaurant, dreaming of becoming a chef one day. Thomas, on the other hand, developed an interest in management and finance, following in his mother's footsteps. Together, the brothers represented the next generation that would carry on the legacy of the Emperor's crown. Financial stability also allowed Grace to achieve dreams she had long postponed. She was able to buy a house in a safe and welcoming neighborhood, providing her children with a home filled with love and security. The house was decorated with memories of Nick and her father, Leo, honoring the memory of both men who had deeply impacted their lives. One ordinary workday at the Emperor's Crown, Grace was busy reviewing inventories and coordinating with her team. Everything seemed to be in order, and the restaurant ran like clockwork. She decided to take a moment to review the security camera footage, a routine she had maintained since Nick's time. As she reviewed the images, something caught her attention. On one of the cameras showing the back alley of the restaurant, she saw a young woman rummaging through the trash bins. The girl, dressed in worn-out clothes and with a look of desperation, was taking out scraps of food and eating quickly. Grace's heart skipped a beat. The image transported her back years to a time when she had been in a similar situation, collecting leftovers to feed her children. She felt a wave of compassion and nostalgia. She knew exactly how that young woman felt. Without wasting any time, Grace left the restaurant and headed to the alley. When she arrived, she found the young woman still eating. The girl, upon seeing her, stopped, clearly frightened. "I'm sorry, forgive me, it wasn't my intention," she began before being interrupted. "Hello," Grace said gently. "You don't have to do this. Come with me. I'll offer you a hot meal and a safe place." The young woman, with a look of surprise and tears in her eyes, nodded slowly. Grace led her inside the restaurant, remembering all the times she had felt the same fear and desperation. As they entered, Grace thought of Nick and how he had transformed her life. Now it was her turn to do the same for someone else. Serving a hot meal to the young woman, surrounded by the warmth and support of the restaurant community, Grace understood that Nick's legacy lived on not only in her but in every act of kindness and compassion she performed. And so, with her heart full of love and gratitude, she set out to continue her journey, carrying with her Nick's legacy and the promise of an even more abundant future for everyone. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Grace's inspiring story. We hope this tale of overcoming, compassion, and community has touched your hearts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave your comments. Until next time, and remember to always find the strength to move forward, no matter the challenges. See you soon.